Hi, fourth grade. This is a quick screencast to reveal the updated poetry if-then unit. This is built into our schedule, either to be done just before the test prep unit or just after it. It's only about 6 to 8 days. It's based on the if-then unit that's titled Little Things Are Big. In our if-then book. But third grade actually took the first bend of this unit, and then we as fourth grade took the second bend. So that's why it's a shorter unit. But we did want, as a literacy steering team, something that we wanted to make sure, even if it wasn't built into the if-then unit, was moments and language to support students with poetry, the elements of poetry, those terms, stanza, line, rhyme scheme, etc., but also the figurative language terms such as hyperbole, simile, metaphor, and personification, for example. So we did build in a couple of extra lessons for that. But the rest of it is just right out of the if-then unit, but you can feel free to just use this document on its own. And so if we go through just the front matter of it, at the beginning, it just goes through how third grade is using the first bend, we're using the second bend. And really the big work of this unit is to remember that this is a reading unit and not a writing unit. So we're going to really focus on analyzing poems and deciphering what some of that deep language is really meaning, and or just getting to the whole big meaning of a poem, a theme of a poem. We're going to look at some poetic language, of course, and what are the intended effects of the poems. Looking really closely at the endings of poems and using that to help us understand the big meaning. And the biggest thing would be to look for opportunities to transfer this work to the reading of novels. When we have noticed authors using this language, what is it really telling us? So just to highlight some of the standards that would naturally come about in this unit are determining theme, determining and inferring the meanings of these words and phrases, right? And then it says explaining the major differences between poems, dramas, and prose. What is the structure? So we'll get into that. And last, we'll build in some opportunities for you to compare and contrast themes, maybe a short story to a poem, for example. We know we even see that in IAR. Some resources that are relevant for this unit. The first thing I learned when making this unit was that the Dewey Decimal section, 811, is all poetry. So if you were to go to 811 in your community library or your school library, it'll be riddled with books on poetry. But otherwise, you can just reach out to your librarian just to see what other books might be of use, just to get a good text set going for students in your classroom. There's a poetry folder here, and all of this contains the different poems we've downloaded and or other resources or anchor charts for this unit, but everything's linked in where needed. These different websites are all free, and most of them you need to just create a login for a free account. They are amazing, not only just for poetry, but in general. So Common Lit is something you may already have heard of, but one of our lessons does use this source. So it would be good to click on this link and then go ahead and do the free login. So that way when you get to that lesson, you're already logged in. Poetry Foundation has some really great poems. So again, if you wanted to build a text set for students, you could do that with this. Learn Zillion is another resource you're going to want to create a free login with, because one of our lessons uses that as well, and therefore when you get there you're ready to go. It's the very last lesson, so you have some time, but that has more of a video quick mini lesson on some different concepts, and it's just nice to hear it in a different way from a different person. The last two poems, Kids Like in the Poem Farm, are naturally, like you would assume, some awesome websites with great poetry to build some more text sets for kids. Now, there is no assessment for this unit. However, knowing that sometimes these types of this type of literature is on an IAR test, we did pull in some stems, some question stems. It's at the bottom of the doc. So if we were to go to that bookmark, here is what the literacy team noticed is when poetry is asked of students to identify either the theme or what line of this poem which sentence summarizes the speaker's thoughts, and always that A-B, right? So trying to look for some text evidence. And even the last one here, it's asking them, like, which evidence from the story supports it? Is it? And they're asking students to get real specific. Setting, dialogue, description, or rhythm, right? And so we know some of those relate to the poems, but not always. It kind of is a give or take there. If you were interested in some extra materials outside of our test prep unit, I found some things on Achieve the Core and even Common Lit that have paired passages. So a passage paired with a poem. And there's some questions already built in with both resources. So if you clicked on either link, that document is there and that document's here, and it contains both stories and the questions. Sometimes it's just nice to get a feel for where the kids are. Some other things you might want to just assess or keep in mind as you go through the unit are asking students to be more familiar with the terms related to poetry. So again, rhyme scheme, line, stanza. The theme of a poem, just like we talked about a moment ago, and then analyzing the meaning of figurative language within a poem, really getting to the deeper meaning. So this whole unit is 6 lessons, but we built 2 additional ones in, as you'll see in red. This is where we added some opportunities to talk about the elements of poetry in session 1. And in session 2, optional session 2 that is where there is, it also says elements of poetry, but it's, when you open the slide, you'll notice, in fact, I'll do it right now, you'll notice some of the slides are supportive. Like this is a little repeat from the first session. You could use this for both. But as you get down to here, it really goes into the figurative language. And then it will give an example, not only of the definition, but it gets into some examples from text. So this really goes through a lot of that if you wanted to use it as a resource. So that's the 2 optional sessions. And then it starts over, so numerically I just went back to session 1. I hope that's not confusing. But when the actual if-then unit asks for them to first think about what parts of poems work together to make meaning, you'll notice that we've built in both the teaching point, some, active engagement, sorry, my mind went blank, the active engagement element to the lesson, and really some explicit examples for you and the students to go through. Some explicit models, and the link, right? So having all of this right here at your disposal hopefully will make it easy to execute. Something I mentioned before session 1 is right here, that these 2 sessions, like the real ones, not in red, they could actually be combined into 1 lesson or still kept together as 2 days. The reason is this session 1 first asks students to look at the parts of a poem and look at them separately. What are they each stanza saying? Whereas session 2 says, let's look at all those parts and put them together to figure out the big meaning of the poem. So they lend themselves to each other. So again, depending on how your students are doing, if you feel they can handle all of it at once, otherwise you can break it down. So as you just scroll through, the little header by each session number really gives a quick description of each lesson. You don't necessarily need to do every single lesson. You can decide what is best for you. You can also decide if you want students to have other poems. These ones that are built in here just have the examples already flushed out for you, so that way you don't have to go hunting for different things. But here's a lot of those examples. Obviously, as you can imagine, anything with a blue hyperlink has the source right there. And just really looking through a lot of these. And once we get down to session 6, that's where I feel like a lot of the meat and culmination of this unit are at, where they ask students to determine the theme of a poem, and it's so important for so many things we do. There are some extra resources that I pulled in from the test prep unit. So you'll notice all of these here. There's another one right there. This is that this is that session where you needed to have a Learn Zillion account and read the poem Land of Nod aloud to your students first. And then you'll notice this, and we have the Land of Nod downloaded here for your reference. But here would take you to that instructional video. And then once you click on it, it's kind of nice to see he really goes through, and it's short, it's less than 8 minutes if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 7:50. And he goes through looking at this entire poem, The Land of Nod, through the lens of theme. So if the volume was up, you would hear him. But it's just nice to have the visual and auditory and just another little mode. And that is really it in a nutshell. So once again, let me just take you to the calendar to show how or when that is this could be executed. it's not necessary, to be honest. You could even do this in May. But if you wanted the students to be exposed to the theme lesson, session 6 in this unit, and you wanted it before the students do IAR, then maybe you start your test prep unit on the 24th of February. And as we talked about on that screencast, that's about 3 weeks and 2 days. You could end that on February 17th. And then you could begin the poetry if then unit February 18th through that next week. And to be honest, you could kind of rearrange things. You could do it sequentially or bring the theme one up if you'd like. So that way, because as you notice here, IAR window opens on the 2nd. The map window opens on the 30th. It all depends on what your building, obviously, schedule will be, but just so you know when the window opens. So that's where all of that could lie, and then historical fiction book clubs would just be next. So it just gives you something to think about. But going back to the poetry lesson, this will be linked into our map over here on Thursday, and then you'll have access to all of this. Something else that, as a lit steering team, we realized that since the paired writing unit for this could be an if-then writing, you could choose either the revision or the poetry anthologies writing unit. The poetry anthologies writing unit might be a nice unit to pair with this. We have not created a unit plan as we have with the reading. Maybe in the future we will, but in the meantime it might be just a handy resource to have as you go through this with your students. All right, take care. Good luck with everything. And if you need any or have any questions, just reach out to kkarasek at barrington220.org. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.